sorrow and strife, pleasure and gaiety, spending almost 79 years of plotting the planet Earth from Kopel, Russia, where the first 10 years of my life were lived, to Poland, to Germany, to Belgium, then to the great United States of America, looking back from a great-granddaughter, two grandsons, and 6 granddaughters, 2 lovely daughters, and 1 son, a wife with almost 54 years of married life to look back on. My family of a brother and 2 sisters, nieces and nephews spread over the land where my parents lived and died. I am asked to record my roots, just to record the life and loves of my dear mother, who was a true pioneer, will take several volumes. When my grandmother Sandel passed away at the birth of her 8th child, my Aunt Molly, my mother was a young lady of 19 years. Because mother was the 2nd child next to Uncle Nathan, mother had to take on the care of every part of my grandfather's household, including Uncle Max, Harry, Ben, Philip, Samuel, and infant Molly. The house, the same one that I was born in, was large, with high ceilings and a huge kitchen with a brick oven large enough to sleep the entire family on its top during cold winter nights, along with housing 1 or 2 cows in the kitchen. When severe weather hit us, the kitchen door led to the garden, and across from the garden was the silo, and under the silo was the barn. A water well about 10 feet from the front steps provided good water, and all dining was done in what may be called a great living room. This room was also used by grandfather for his mirror and glass work, and Uncle Nathan, with the help of Uncle Max, did carpentry there. Near the barn was a blacksmith shop, where Uncle Harry with Uncle Ben, helping, would spend most of their time, shoeing horses and making tools and plows used in farming. This was done with supervision by grandfather, who seemed to know his business. There were 3 good-sized plots of land about a mile from Kopel that had been willed to my great-grandfather Abraham Jacob Wolfovitch by a wealthy Russian landowner to be used for a period of 99 years. And since grandfather was his only son, Shlomo Wolfovitch inherited this land and trained Uncle Philip as its farmer and cattle carrier, with Uncle Sam and Aunt Molly to help out. In Kopel, county of Slutsk, state of Minsk, there was a population of about 500 souls, with no sewers, no running water, no coal, no gas, no electric, no bathroom, and no toilet. Light was by candle or by kerosene lamp. There was a cluster of 3 separate schools about 100 yards from grandfather's home, and across a great marketplace on the other side of the town was an Orthodox cathedral, and a short distance away there was a Roman Catholic church. There was also a jailhouse in the town where drunks were housed for market days, after market days, until they sobered up and paid up. On the market days that were usually held 1 day a week, the town was jammed with men and women and children, and mother had her dry goods store to tend to. With the cooking and baking and nursing and doctoring and washing and cleaning, without complaining and loving everything she did, mother managed to keep herself occupied. A year or 2 after grandmother Shandel passed away, grandfather remarried. The woman he married came with 2 daughters from another marriage and refused to do any housework, and soon became pregnant and gave birth to Goldie. About a year later, she gave birth to Sprinter. During this time, Uncle Nathan married Ike and left to live with his in-laws, and Ike gave birth to Bella, and then Arthur, and then Uncle Nathan left for the U.S. Soon after Nathan left, Max, and after Max, Harry migrated to the United States. In the meantime, Mother was able to cast a love spell on the two teenagers who came along with the new lady of the household, to a point where they became very useful to the well-being of the household. This friendship lasted throughout their lives in Coppell and in the United States, where their lives were ended. I must conclude that the three of these ladies had a very profitable and very pleasing and pleasant life with their families in these United States. As for Goldie and Sprinter, Goldie migrated to the city of New York after we left for the United States, and Sprinter remained with my grandfather and is still in Russia. My paternal grandparents lived in Minka with their son Mela and his family, who lived directly across the road from my grandparents Itche and Chaifegas Feinstein, who brought 17 children upon this earth, 2 sons and 15 daughters. Most of the daughters passed away at their youth. In the summer of 1909, my mother and sister Jenny and I lived with them until time had arrived for us to leave for the United States in late July. This was the best year of my life because my uncle's family, comprised of 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose names were Rachel and Charlie and Nathan and Abraham. Nathan and Abe were of my age and were kind and good to me. We would go swimming in the river and ride ponies, and if the weather was right, we would spend the nights in the hayloft. Uncle Mela had a large house that was used as an inn. A windmill was used for grinding kernels into flour and also for operating his water well. Grandfather Itche was a fine horseman and a good farmer, and my dear grandmother was very kind and pleasing to me, along with being a very fine cook. Because I was only 9 years of age when I was with them, I had no idea how that visit with my dear grandparents would affect my life. It is with gratitude that I thank the Lord that I was allowed this enormous pleasure. Before my mother and sister and I visited my grandparents, we went first to Gutke, where we spent several days, then to Sorke, where we stayed a week. Sorke lived along the road of a great forest. From there we went to Slutsk, where Aunt Malta-Riva lived, with her husband. She had no children. So we hurried Mother along to go to Mlinka, where my grandparents lived. Gutke and Sorke and Matla-Riva were all the daughters left alive in 1909 from a brood of 15 girls. Of course, our reason for these visits was to bid them our goodbyes, which was sad. But the goodbyes to my grandparents in Mlinka and also in Coppell, the sadness was unbearing. My father, whose name was Shalom Sachne Feinstein, was drafted into the Russian Army at the age of 21. After completing his 3-year stay in the Army, and upon his return home to Mlinka, Father stopped over to visit his uncle Shalom Shmuel Wolfovitch, where he met and married my mother in the spring of 1897. They made their home with my grandparents, Shandel and Shalom Shmuel. Father was a cabinet maker by trade and soon established himself in the Coppell making fine furniture. January 23, 1899, I was born. With my birth came trouble. Mothers had to be able to produce milk for their infants, or the infants would die of starvation. In my case, there was no milk. As luck would have it, Aunt Reike, who was still nursing her son Arthur, decided to wean Arthur and take me on as a boarder. This saved my life. thanks to Aunt Ike. The next 2 years, 2 other sons were brought into this world by my parents who died in their youth because of starvation. It should be understood that in Coppell, when the sun goes down, there's nothing to do but go to bed. That seems to be why children are made. There was really no other thing to do that didn't cost money. But the cost of kerosene, what it was a lot cheaper to do one's homework during daylight. So in 1902, Mother was again pregnant. With a past history of giving life and food to her newborn, interesting a father, Grandfather stepped into the picture with his advice that Mother go on a long vacation. So it was decided to send Mother to Aunt Gutke's farm for a long stay and to take me with her because Mother would not let me out of her sight. Since Aunt Gutke had young children about my age, Mother agreed to go there. I was about 4 years of age when we arrived to Aunt Gutke's. The cows on Aunt Gutke's farm were the largest and the fattest that I ever saw. They were all black, and their milk tasted better than any milk I ever drank. And the cheese that was made there was very pleasing to my taste. Aunt Gutke had a large belly, and it was growing bigger with every passing day. About 2 or 3 weeks after we arrived there, Aunt Gutke started acting funny. That night there was a lot of noise and a lot of excitement in the house. It woke me up, so I walked over nice and quiet to see what was going on. In no time at all, Mother yelled, "It's our boy!" Everything became quiet except for the cry of a baby. As it turned out, I was witness to the birth of our rebel, Benny Russell's brother. After about 2 months' stay at Gutke's, we returned home. In May 1904, Mother gave birth to Shandel, Jenny. This time, Mother had plenty of food for Jenny. Soon after Jenny's birth, Father was called back into the army to fight the Jap. Winter of 1905, Father came home from the war, and in a few days, Father started making furniture in the living room. Father worked from sunup to sundown until the furniture was delivered, and he collected the money and left without saying goodbye to me. Months later, a letter came from America. It was then that Mother told me that Father was settled in Boston, along with Uncle Nathan and Max and Harry. Uncle Ben and Molly and their children Jack and Ida, along with Uncle Sam, left Russia, and Sam came to Boston, and Ben and his family settled in Sioux City, Iowa. 1907, Father brought Benny Russell to Boston, and 1909 was our turn to leave Coppell for Boston. Just to tell that I was born in Coppell, it would simply confuse any person who listened to what I was trying to say, and let it go at that. Who cares about Capulli anyway? Over 9 years of my life were lived in and around Capulli. Capulli, a town of about 500 or 600 people, is a town in Russia, in the state of Minsk, and the county of Slutsk. To enter Capulli from the south, there were 2 separate roads, several hundred feet apart. Capulli was what the Jewish people called the town where I was born. The Russians called it Coppell. Entering the town from the Gentile side, one passed through a great forest, and as one approached the town, there was a large cemetery to the right. Then there was a long hill to climb, with small houses along the sides of the road. You were in the town of Copel when you reached the top of the hill and passed by the constabulary to your left. There one found a great plateau as far as the eye could see. First you were in a great market area. Over to your right was the great Russian Orthodox Church, and on a line with that church, and some distance from it, was the Roman Catholic Church. And for quite some distance, there were mostly Christian homes around the churches. The gathering place was mostly in a great marketplace. There, stores such as the drugstore, the dry goods store, the hardware, the bakery, and the candy store was the tiniest of all the stores. To enter the Jewish side of Copel, one would pass through the same forest and soon find to his right the Jewish cemetery on the top of a little hill. Following the road to the town, one passed houses on both sides of the road. Just before you came to the beginning of the hill, and to your right was the Osher house, where the matzeva maker lived with his family and 3 sons and 1 daughter, Ike, who married Uncle Nathan and who saved me from extinction as an infant. When one reached the top of the hill, on the Jewish side of the left was the Hebrew school. Then there was the rabbi's home. Then there was the shulef, a cluster of 3 different shuls erected in a great square. The street where grandfather's house was on, the east corner was the inn, where people stopped to eat and drink and stay over. On the west corner of the street was the winemaker's home and business, and about 50 feet from the winemaker was grandfather's house. This house was big and tall, with tall ceilings and a good-sized attic where was stored apples and pears for use most of the year. There was a huge dining room table where all our meals were served, and part of this room was used for carpentry work and glazing and mirror making. And the entire north side of the house had bedrooms. There was a very good water well about 10 feet from the front of the front porch. That was our own well. The kitchen had a great oven heated by logs of wood. The oven stood about 7 feet tall and about 10 feet wide and about 20 feet long. And when the cold weather arrived, we would all sleep on top of that oven, along with a cow or 2 in the kitchen with the family. When Mother baked bread, she would shape at least 4 or 5 loaves about 2 feet in diameter and put them in this oven at the same time, along with the rest of her cooking and baking. This should give an idea to the size of the oven itself. The bread baking was done at least twice a week, while the rest of the cooking was done daily. The samovar on the dining room table was in operation at all times, and I never did know what was used to keep it hot, but it did not take me long to learn how to chop a piece of sugar from the lumps that were in the house at all times. The only one in the entire family who would talk with me was grandfather, and since he never mentioned the sugar bit, I took it upon myself to not only chop some for myself, but to serve others with that chore. Looking back to my young life in Copel, I never had a single friend or playmate. Outside of my uncles and aunts, and they were many years my seniors. There was a great garden that we would enter from the kitchen door, where all our vegetables grew, that lasted all year long, because under that garden was a great cellar, where were kept great stores of milk, cheese, cream, butter, along with barrels of sauerkraut and pickles, and hundreds of jars of prepared jars of jams and jellies and certain vegetables. This cellar was deep and huge and would be entered through a small lift that was set in the center of the garden. The silo was directly across from the garden, where was stored hay, oats, corn, wheat, along with other things that belonged in a silo. Under this silo was the barn, where were kept 2 cows and several horses, along with a dog or two and some cats. No dog or cat was ever allowed in grandfather's house, and I was forbidden to pet a dog or a cat because I was told that they were not ever clean. Horses and cows were curried and cleaned, but never dogs or cats, so I kept them at my distance. I never saw a police officer in Coppell, but it was rumored that the Cossacks were coming. All living things were removed from sight, and the shutters were closed. So I never saw a Cossack in all the time that I lived in Russia. But after they left the town, there were always some dead bodies that had to be buried in Coppell. Sometime I would wonder to myself how I would act if I met up with a live Cossack. If I would mention the word Cossack, I would be warned never to mention that word again. But somehow I always felt that I would like to meet up with one of them and maybe bite his ear or pinch his nose or do something to make him yell ouch. But it never did happen. I probably mentioned before that Coppell, or any other town or village that we visited in Russia while I lived there, had much less in improvements than we had in Coppell. Grandfather, along with a few of our better people, came together and built a steam houseboat on his property a short distance from his house on the same street. No more than 3 years before I left there. The following year, the Pincus was built, a short distance from his barn. Before the Pincus, when anyone had to perform the number 1 or 2, day or night, they just went outside and performed the act just like any animal would do. But the Pincus was another story. There were 2 separate sections, one for men and the other for women, with 12 persons on each side, where one could sit in comfort exactly as if one entered an outhouse for this comfort. Coppell's Pincus became an interesting talking point all over the area. In Coppell, the only lights were by candle or kerosene lamp. There were no paved streets, no sewer, no coal, no gas. If one can imagine the great life change brought to Coppell by the steam bathhouse and the Pincus, the effect brought many visitors just to view and enjoy its great comforts. However, no matter what good one does, some are hurt by it. Pigs were always roaming around Coppell. And when a pig saw anyone drop his pants, The pig was licking his chops and standing by ready to chomp up his delicacy. If the Pincus did anything bad, it hurt the Copel pigs. Milk and other preserves with an entrance in the middle of the garden by a trap door. The attic of the house was used to store apples and pears for winter use. My great-grandfather, Abraham Jacob Wolfovitch, was willed about 150 acres of land in 3 separate places to be used for 99 years by a wealthy Russian. My grandfather used the land to grow fodder, and the main crops were peas and chickpeas, which was shipped to several parts of Russia. Since Jews were not allowed to own real estate in Russia, this was a great asset to his well-being. Each of the 3 parcels of land was rested on its 7th year of production according to Jewish law. Grandfather was a well-educated man. He was interested particularly in... Grandfather had a machine for rolling his own cigarettes. His tobacco machine was his greatest pleasure in his life. At my birthday party, Grandfather said or did something that I disliked. So the first chance I had to get my hands on his treasure, I hid it in the silo, and although everyone in the household searched everywhere, they couldn't find the tobacco. When Friday morning came around, Grandfather would go to the bathhouse, steam bath. This Friday, Grandfather took me by the hand and in his normal, controlled voice said, "It is time that you start bathing with the rest of our grown friends every Friday. It doesn't only clean your body, it cleans you all over." I went with him and enjoyed the sweet sweat bath. On the way home, Grandfather stopped me outside the house and asked if I enjoyed the bath. I told him that I did. Then he said, "I know that you didn't like my behavior at your birthday party, and I am very sorry for it. I know that you must also be sorry for things that you may have done. Anybody can make a mistake, but it's a fool who doesn't try to correct himself. I am going into the house," he said, "and I ask you to show some kindness to your best friend and put my tobacco back to where you found it." My love and respect for Grandpa was so great that I ran to the silo with tears in my eyes. I picked up the tobacco and brought it to him and said, "Grandfather, I'm sorry for what I did and will never again make a fool of myself." Grandfather kissed me and said, "You should remember this day all the days of your life." It's over 71 years, and I remember that day as if it happened today. The steam bath house was erected about 2 years before I used it. It was about 2 minutes from the house on the street where we lived. Every Friday morning, the principal people of the shul, including the rabbi, would gather there and hold political discussions. And on Friday was the only day that we had a Jew caretaker there, so that no secrets that were spoken would be passed out to the wrong people. So it was like a secret meeting. Regarding Copel, we're talking about the marketplace. Everything that was brought to the market was in a live state, like chickens, ducks, geese, all kinds of animals that were available at that time, including pigs, were brought in live. Vegetables and fruits and other things were brought in its season. And you would have to take your merchandise home after you purchased it and slaughter it yourself, where slaughtering was necessary. Of course, our Jewish people would go to the shochet, and the Goyim would handle it their way. On the shulef there was 3 separate shows. The main show had the rabbi in it and the business people and the undertaker and the shochet and all those who were supposed to be important people of the town. Then there was a show for the tailors and the carpenters and the shoemaker and those kind of people. Then the other show was for the horse traders, the balagola, and the working people and the apprentices. Each one of the trades always had apprentices who were working for practically nothing at all, just for keep until they learned their trade. My Aunt Ike's father and brothers were matzeva makers, and of course they raided the shul where the rabbi went with the rest of the very fine tradesmen. They did a beautiful job on their matzevas. As a matter of fact, when they finally left Russia and came to the United States, her brother settled in New York. And when my father passed away, they made a matzeva for him and shipped it to Boston, where it's still standing in very fine shape. In all the time that I lived in Kapulia, there was only one wedding that I could remember being celebrated there. But there was a wedding that I'll always remember, and that was the wedding that took place between my Uncle Ben and Aunt Molly. This wedding was in Aunt Molly's parents' farm, and it was in the wintertime. And all those in the household, in grandfather's household, with the exception of the grandfather, my mother, Jenny, and I left for the wedding a couple of days before the wedding. On the day of the wedding, my grandfather hired a balagola with a troika of horses, and for us to travel to the wedding. The sled had wide sides on it, and they were shaped like wings. And of course the trip took all day. We started out in the morning, and we didn't get there until about an hour before the ceremony began. The wedding was held in a great barn next to the house, and there was band of music, and there was all kinds of food and all. A great horde of people were there, and finally, I guess I fell asleep or something, and they brought me up, put me on the hayloft up on the top, and when I woke up in the morning, there were about 60 people sleeping on the hayloft. Aunt Molly was a very, very beautiful bride. She had rosy cheeks, a healthy-looking specimen of a young lady, and everything went off beautiful. My grandfather decided to stay over for another day to discuss the certain conditions there. And when we left, Uncle Ben remained with Aunt Molly's family, whose name was Kalinsky. Of course, when Aunt Molly's brothers came to America, they changed the name, shortened it to Kalin. But they were a very fine family of people. They were settled in Sioux City, and after Uncle Ben and Aunt Molly brought Ida and then Jack into this world, they migrated to America. But while they were there, and when she became pregnant with Ida, Aunt Molly became very ill. Her face would become very red, and she would almost be like a maniac. And it worried everybody because she came to Coppell for visits. She went to doctors everywhere, and they couldn't do very much for her. She swelled up, and finally, after she gave birth to Ida, things cleared up. And I always thought about the troubles that she had when she was a young married girl. And many years later, when I was laid up at the Boston City Hospital, there was a man in the bed next to me who resembled the illnesses that Aunt Molly went through. And doctors called it migraine headache. It's a terrible, terrible thing. The reason they call it migraine, I found out, is because they don't know exactly what they could do about people getting rid of it. The trip to Aunt Molly's wedding was not without excitement. We traveled from Coppell to her home all day long. There was a lot of snow on the ground. There were no people traveling either way in all the time that we were on the road. It was a very cold day. And what surprised me, that the driver took along a rifle. But after several hours, I found out what he used the rifle for. A bunch of wolves were chasing us. Great big Russian wolves. And he managed to hit a couple of them before they disappeared. And the horses were traveling at speeds you'd never imagine. As I say, it was all snow all the way. When we finally got there, my mother especially was very excited because Jenny slept most of the way and grandfather never even turned around. He just lay there on the sleigh. We're all dressed warm and covered well, and I still have a shiver when I think about those wolves chasing us. From the day that I landed in Boston until my dear father passed away, 3 years and 3 months later, there was never a time that I said anything that would disturb him in any way. I refused to take money from him or from Mother. On the corner of Seneca Street and Harrison Avenue was a drugstore. Father needed medicine, so he took me with him. Father introduced me to the pharmacist in order to collegize for me. I really enjoyed the treat. On the way home, I asked Father what the medicine was for. Father told me then that he was seriously ill and is being treated by a great doctor. Father made me promise that I should not say anything about his illness to Mother. After I had attended school about a month, I was able to read signs. When Father learned that, he told me they would like to have me come and visit his shop on William Street, near Dudley Street, in Roxbury. The next day, when school was out, I started on the run down Washington Street to William Street. I covered a distance in about a half hour. The shop was producing builder supplies, such as doors, windows, and many other products for the building trade. When Father saw me, he asked how I got there. And when I told him that I ran all the way from school, Father told me I must never do that again. And besides, how will Mother feel when she finds you missing, when she sees that the other children are home from school and you are nowhere to be seen? Father introduced me to his partner and to some of his help. He took me by the hand and said, "Come with me." We got on the delivery wagon. A beautiful gray horse provided the transportation back to Seneca Street. Father let me off and went back to the shop. When I entered the house, Mother asked where I had been so late. When I told her I went to Father's shop and that Father brought me back to Seneca Street, then returned to the shop, Mother said, "How could you do that to me? What if you were lost?" I answered, "But I'm here." Mother said, "If you can run to the shop without telling me first, you can wash the floor in the bathroom and the hall, and that will teach you a lesson." When Father came home, Mother asked him what he thought of his visitor. Father said, "Our son is Americanized." All the people in the shop told me that they were as surprised and delighted with my visitor as I was. I told Nadine not to do that again unless he tells you first. The day before Thanksgiving, Father took me with him to the shop. After the wagon was loaded, one of the men came along with us. Father did the driving. He drove to a building on Washington Street near Columbia Road. There the wagon was unloaded, and our men drove the wagon away. Father took me by the hand, and we walked up many stairs. When we got to the top floor, I recognized my Uncle Max, who was working as a carpenter. Max grabbed me up and gave me a bear hug, and Father told him about my first visit to the shop. Uncle Max couldn't get over it. Uncle Max was married and had a son, Abraham, and 2 daughters. Abraham J. was about 4 years old, so Uncle Max had Father promised that he would bring us to his home for Thanksgiving dinner. Uncle Max lived in Dorchester with Aunt Etta. On the way down, Father took me through every room in a 4-story building. When we left the building, walking toward Grove Hall, Father told me that the building was the first to have electric lights and steam heat in that area, and that he was the builder, and that the building would be ready for occupancy in about a month, and that it had 4 apartments on the floor. At Grove Hall, we boarded a Dudley Street car. At Dudley Street Station, we walked upstairs and boarded an elevated train and got off at Dudley Street. We picked up a transfer and took a streetcar on Washington Street and got off at Asylum Street, just 1 block from Seneca Street. I asked our father how much it cost for the ride, and he told me that it cost a nickel, and that I rode for free because I was under 12 years of age. I asked him if I could take the ride by myself, and Father said that I would have to pay a nickel, the same as he. Thanksgiving Day was spent at Uncle Max's house. When I met Annette's daughter, Shandel, and Dorothy, along with Abraham J. After dinner, I took Abraham by the hand and we took a walk. Before I started out, Father put some change in my pocket. For the first store we came to, I walked into the store and bought an ice cream cone for Abe. To this day, civil engineer Abe J., who passed his 75th birthday, reminds our friends that I was the only one who ever bought him anything in all of his youth. Aunt Molly lived with her brother Nathan and his beautiful wife Rike and daughter Bella and son Arthur from the day we landed in Boston. That winter, when Father had to go to the bathroom, I went with him. He would stand at the bowl with his hand on my shoulder and pass blood. Many times he would ask if I told anyone about it. I assured him that I never did. One time he took me with him to his doctor on Commonwealth Avenue. When he left the doctor, I noticed tears in his beautiful face. I thought, what could I say? And in a flash I decided to keep my mouth shut. I was now 10 years old. When summer came, Father was operated on at Mass General Hospital. Father ordered Mother not to bring me to the hospital to visit her. Mother was pregnant and ignorant of the seriousness of what was going on, and I was too young to know the real truth of the matter. After Father passed away, December 1911, did I find out that the doctors opened him up and sewed him up again. Nothing could be done for him. They sewed him up and let it go at that. The only time that I saw him with tears on his face was the winter of 1910 at home. Father never discussed his physical condition with anyone, not even me. November 1910, my brother Abraham J. was born. August 1911, Father was again opened up at Mass General, closed up, and closed up. This time he began losing weight. Father couldn't get around. He spent most of his time in bed. His last day came December 1911. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Father called for the doctor. A very short time later, the doctor came in and examined him and called me over and said, "Your father told me to tell you that I think you will lose your father by 6 o'clock tonight." Uncle Sam was in the house, and he heard what the doctor told me. He ran across the street and soon came up with Uncle Nathan. A little before 6 o'clock, Father asked for a cup of tea. Uncle Sam ran to the kitchen and brought the tea. I was sitting on a chair beside the bed, as Father ordered. Father took a sip of the tea and returned the cup to Sam. Father grabbed my hand, and at the stroke of 6, Father was gone. The funeral was the next day. By the time we arrived at the Denham Burial Ground, it looked to me like the whole world turned out for the funeral. Again, I repeat that the hearse and the coaches were horse-driven. By the time we got home from the cemetery, it was late night, and the only one who came home with us was Uncle Sam. The day after the big blow, I found out at school where to go to get a license to sell newspapers. And that night I started selling for a neighbor. I had no corner, so I had to jump streetcars. Papers were selling for a cent a copy, and I earned a quarter of a cent for each paper I sold. My district was from Dover Street to Northampton Street and back. And if I sold 100 papers, I would earn 25 cents. I had to jump streetcars to do it, and the Sunday paper sold for 5 cents. I earned 1 cent for each paper I sold. If I earned $2 a week, I did very well. Business was such in Yankee Doodle, Boston, that Uncle Sam, who was then about 20 years of age, drove a bottled soda delivery wagon from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. at a salary of $3 a week. A loaf of bread cost 5 cents. 2 pounds of tomatoes cost 5 cents. A herring cost 3 cents. And a quart of milk cost a nickel. A pound of meat cost between 9 and 12 cents. A person could get a room for $1 a week, and a weekly meal ticket cost less than $3. The apartment we occupied went for $15 a month. Soon after Father passed away, we moved to a basement apartment on Seneca Street. Mother used the front room as a grocery store. We had a kitchen and a bedroom in the rear of the store. Mother, Jenny, Abraham, and I slept in the bedroom. Mother was pregnant. After a night's work of jumping streetcars with the newspapers, I never knew where Mother slept. Uncle Max and his family rented an apartment in the building on Washington Street with electric lights and steam heat, and Uncle Harry managed to get his brother-in-law, Sam Saperstein, to take over the property. And Mother never discussed her money problems with me. When winter 1912 came, Mother, being pregnant and suffering from varicose veins, was forced to quit a grocery business and found an apartment on the 5th floor on Mott Street. Molly moved in with us. Molly was working and contributing to her sister's well-being. Mother managed to make connections with Metropolitan Coal Company to sell coal on time payments. All the customers were in Roxbury and Dorchester, so every Sunday after breakfast, it was my job to go on foot from the South End into Roxbury and Dorchester to make the collections of 50 cents to $1 a week. Uncle Nathan, Max, and Harry lived in the Roxbury district area, and I was offered something to eat was at Uncle Nathan's home. July 1912, Sister Celia was born in the apartment on Mott Street. When Mother went into labor, I ran for a doctor to the Boston dispensary and managed to get a doctor to come with me to the house. Aunt Molly was with Mother, and through her labor, Celia was a beautiful child, and because of Father's physical history, the young doctor came back several times to comfort Mother. Soon after the birth of Celia, Mother took on the job of selling wine and whiskey on installments, along with matzo that I had to pick up in a push cart in the West End and deliver to customers in Roxbury and Dorchester. At times, Uncle Sam would help out. Uncle Ben had migrated to America with his wife, Molly, and 2 children, and instead of coming to Boston, Uncle Ben settled with his wife and family in Sioux City, Iowa. In a short time after Celia was born, Uncle Sam left for Boston for Sioux City. 1913, Uncle Philip, the last of the brothers, left Coppell and came to Boston. Philip was a farmer of the family, and he left a wife, a son Herman, and daughter Shandel in Coppell. The only job that Philip could find in Boston was to pluck chickens. Philip moved into our apartment because it was just one block from where he worked. Philip was a great help to my mother because she would do all kinds of housework for his sister. Walking the 5 flights of stairs was getting to mother, and Philip began talking about moving to Roxbury. Philip soon found an apartment on the first floor in a house on Dunkel Street. Across the street where Aunt Molly lived, with her husband Barney Lesberg and son Samuel. That move made things much easier for me. Even the school was only a block away. Winter of 1913, Aunt Molly gave birth to her daughter Mary, a second cesarean birth. It took many months for Molly to come back to normal health, and Mother was with Molly more than she was home. So it was my place to cover for her at home. Spring 1914, Uncle Philip received word from his brother in Sioux City that there was a good job for him there. Sister Jenny was now about 10 years of age and helping take care of her brother and sister, so I decided to accompany Philip to Sioux City. Like my father said several years back, I was Americanized, and Uncle Philip couldn't speak one word of English, and Sioux City was about 1,500 miles away. Uncle Philip had the money to pay for both of us. June 1914, we left for Sioux City. We traveled from Boston to Buffalo to Chicago and then to Sioux City. I soon found that Sioux City was as different from Boston as night from day. With a population of over 50,000, a great packing house area and a central marketplace for everything and anybody wanted to buy. Fourth Street was the main thoroughfare with beautiful stores and shops. Fifth Street was the red light district with a good number of saloons, cowboys, and Indians would come in and out. Life was hectic in the downtown area. The residential areas were nice and clean. Gardens and lawns everywhere. I moved in with Uncle Ben and his family. The next morning I went to the town with Uncle Ben, who worked for his wife's uncle in a wholesale liquor house. After I said my hellos, I went looking for a job. About 3 blocks from the wholesale house, I noticed a sign in the window of the Sioux City Savings Bank reading Boy Wanted. I walked into the bank and applied for the job. And as luck would have it, the owner of the bank was a Jew. And after he got the full story of my life, I was hired for $9 a week. My job was to keep the place clean during banking hours and to shine the brass railings. Uncle Ben's wife Molly was a bit on the nervous side, so I found a room on East 7th Street for $1 a week, and my food cost about $3 a week. Laundry and clothing amounted to another $3 a week. Movie cost 10 cents, so I was an independent youngster until September. When school entry came about, my boss called me into his office and told me that I must go back to school. I tried to tell him that I would register for night school. So he told me that I cannot work in a bank days at my age in Sioux City. I loafed about a week and then found a job at Davidson Department Store as a bundle wrapper. December 24, I found a layoff notice on my envelope with the reason that the busy season is ended for now. Christmas Day, I started work as a dishwasher at the White Front restaurant. The owner was Aunt Molly Wolf's brother, Philip Caleb, who told me to keep an eye out for everything that goes on in the kitchen. About 2 or 3 weeks after I started, a cook did not show up, and Philip told me to do the cooking. I must have done more praying than cooking because everything that came out of the kitchen was so good that Philip told me the cook job was mine. I worked for Philip about 6 months. My pay was $30 a month and all I could eat. There was a man who would come into the kitchen and spend about 5 minutes talking to me and leave. After a while he told me that he was the chef at the Chicago House, a fine hotel on 4th Street. He told me that his name was Johnson and would like to see me there. Several days later I walked into the Chicago House kitchen and talked with Johnson. He told me that I could come in to work for him and that he would start me off at $40 a month.